Hi, this is Dr. Alan Grunning. This is our first video covering the biotoxin treatment overview. So you'll need two things to follow along with me for this video. One is the handout that I gave you on biotoxin treatment overview at your visit. And the other one is the test tracking record that we gave you that we reviewed during your visit also. So this will be a review of all that for you in case you've forgotten anything or have questions or whatever. So that you can follow along. So let's start with the biotoxin treatment overview handout, and we'll just start from the top, and I'll add some things in as we go along. So you've been diagnosed with biotoxin illness, which is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS as we call it. And the causes of CIRS include indoor toxic molds and bacteria and toxins inside a water-damaged building, but also things like chronic Lyme disease, ciguatera fish poisoning, brown recluse spider bites, Pfiesteria, red tide, blue-green algae, which we have problems with down here in Southwest Florida. But out of these, the most common problems are those associated with water-damaged buildings. So, NIOSH says that 50% of the buildings in America are water damaged. Down here in Southwest Florida, it's probably 75% of the buildings are water damaged. And all of those then could be contaminated with indoor toxic molds and 30 other bacteria and inflammagens, including an organism called actinomycetes, which is kind of a cross between a bacteria and a mold. It has some properties of both. And gram-negative bacterial endotoxins. Well, gram-negative bacteria are the same things growing inside hospitals. Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, Haemophilus, just horrible things that are multi-drug resistant. Well, those could be growing in a water-damaged building. Your home also, producing toxins that can poison you. So if we assume that 24% of the population is genetically susceptible to these organisms and toxins, then you can see that a lot of people could really have this, but they're being told they have other problems. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorders, ADHD, leaky gut, and the list goes on and on. So, you had symptoms of biotoxin illness, and then you either failed or didn't fail a VCS test. So the significance of that was that the visual contrast sensitivity test, or VCS test, is very sensitive for biotoxin problems. If you did it correctly and failed it, 98.6% accuracy. If you passed it, and 8% of people can pass it and still be sick with CIRS, then we can't really use it to track your progress moving forward. It would be nice, but it's not going to be very much help. But if you failed it, then we can use it. So a lot of this, though, has to do with your HLA genetics. So let's talk about that for a minute. So if you look at the test tracking record, at the very top, you'll see a place called HLA-DRB1. Well, that's your genetic type, and we went over that during your office visit and what the significance of that genetic type is. So let me explain to you a little bit about what it means, though. So this is and this is in the third paragraph. So this is a defect on your 6th chromosome. And so if you have this, one of the 24% of the population that has this genetic defect, you either are susceptible to the organisms in a water-damaged building or Lyme disease or both. Those are called multi-susceptible individuals. I'm one of them, so I can get all the biotoxins. And that's a defect on your 6th chromosome, and it results in what's called defective antigen presentation, meaning that you can't identify that these things are bad. Your body doesn't make antibodies to kill them, and so they live in you forever, and they produce toxins that are poisoning you. So it's a failure of your innate immune system. Your innate immune system normally is responsible for fighting off foreign invaders. Well, these you can't fight off. And so the molds make things called mycotoxins. The bacteria make things called ribotoxins. So just real briefly, in case you're interested, we know how these things poison us. So you have to go back to some basic cellular biology. So DNA is in the nucleus. That's your genetic code. That's made into messenger RNA in a process called transcription. Then the messenger RNA leaves the nucleus, goes into the cytoplasm, finds some transfer RNA and some amino acids, and then goes and finds a ribosome, and then it combines it all together to make protein. So this is called protein synthesis or translation. This is how you make proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of life. Without proteins, you die. So what happens is these toxins bind to the ribosome and block the ability to make proteins. This is exactly how they kill each other and try to kill us. And so the cell then is not producing proteins, and so it senses that it's under attack and starts shutting everything down, including the mitochondria. So then there's also toxins that interfere with the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria, you've probably heard about mitochondrial dysfunction. So that means that the mitochondria are not producing energy, ATP, the way they're supposed to. And so it results in a condition called hypometabolism or slow metabolism. But the cause of this, a mitochondrial problem, is the CIRS. So to fix it, you have to fix the CIRS. You can take supplements from now until the cows come home, but it's not going to matter if you don't fix the CIRS. So the result of all that is fatigue. That's the main symptom that people have from CIRS. Then your body makes things called cytokines to rev up your immune system to fight this off. So cytokines we've known about for a long time before COVID with the cytokine storm, but cytokines are important because they rev up your immune system to activate it so that you can fight off a foreign attack. So cytokines can be a good thing. The problem is with CIRS, you can't kill these organisms, so the cytokines then just stay high all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. You've probably had this for years. And these high cytokines are causing a lot of the symptoms that you're experiencing. And they cause damage to your brain, for example, that we can see on the NeuroQuant test. And so this results in chronic inflammation. That's why we call this chronic inflammatory response syndrome, because of the effect of the high cytokines that's had for a long time on your system. There's also a test called Gini, which can look at the transcriptomics, and if we need to, we'll discuss about doing that. So we've done a lot of lab testing on you, and we've gone over all that at your office visit, and I may make another video that talks about how to interpret some of these lab tests. We're going to go over a few of them now that are significant. We'll talk about the detoxification process in the second video of this series. Remember that you can learn more about this at survivingmold.com. There's also a book, Mold Illness, Surviving and Thriving, which I would highly recommend you getting. It's a little old. It doesn't talk about actinomycetes and some of the bacteria. It's focused mostly on molds, but what it does do is it teaches you really well how to live with this process, what to do with your stuff, what to do with the house, how to travel. So all those things are covered very well there. Remember that we have a CIRS coach, Jenny, that I use. So if you need help with navigating all these various steps, or you're feeling overwhelmed and you need somebody to talk to, she has support groups, she does one-on-one training, she does all kinds of neat things to help you get through this process. It's all done virtually. So a lot of the symptoms of this had to do with low MSH, and we talked about that at your visit. So if you look at this paragraph, MSH is melanocyte-stimulating hormone. It's made in the part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it controls a lot of things in your body. MSH is one of the most critical hormones in your body, and that's the one that's frequently affected by CIRS. So your brain gets poisoned, and you're not producing MSH the way you're supposed to. So look at all the things that can go wrong when MSH is low. You can read about them here. So if it's low, your sleep becomes poor due to deficient melatonin production, you get sleep deprived, and that causes a breakdown of a bunch of other organ systems and more fatigue. So it adds to the fatigue. Then the production of beta endorphins is depressed and you get pain all over. So beta endorphins control pain response. So if they're gone, then you get fibromyalgia. That's why this happens. You can't lose weight because you don't burn fatty acids properly and you're storing everything as fat. So until your MSH level comes up, you're never going to be able to lose weight the way you want to. We'll work on that afterwards, but first we have to get your MSH level up. Hormones will get out of balance. You become estrogen dominant. Estrogen dominant men or women are horrible. They don't feel good. So we're going to talk about how to work on all that. 80% of patients will develop this antibiotic-resistant staph in the sinus called MARCoNS that we've discussed. It is a big problem because MARCoNS produces a toxin that directly destroys MSH. So we'll never get your MSH levels up as long as you have MARCoNS. So we're going to do a nasal culture and check for that eventually, but we probably haven't done it yet. Then patients develop leaky gut syndrome with poor absorption of nutrients, gut pain, stool problems. That's pretty common. And then the loss of antidiuretic hormone means that you pee out all of your water and you're constantly in a state of dehydration. And that's very common with CIRS patients. So let's see what your MSH level was. So if you go back to the test tracking record and you look at the top here, you'll look at the MSH, which is right under the HLA studies, and you'll see your number. And we've talked about whether that was good, bad, or indifferent. Most of CIRS patients, 99% of them, have horribly low MSH. And so, therefore, that can cause all those various symptoms that you just saw in there. The normal MSH, which, by the way, should be done at LabCorp because it's the only one that's accurate, should be 35 to 80. I want most people to be in the 40-50 range at minimum, and you're probably way under that, and that's why you're having all the problems you're having. So our goal is to get the MSH up through the detox and treatment and supplements and things that we're doing. The next one on the handout, back to the treatment overview, is VIP. So VIP is vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. It's a neuroendocrine modulator. It's made right next to where the MSH is made in the hypothalamus of your brain. And so VIP is regulating everything. It's regulating your neurological system, your endocrine system, your immune system. It's regulating everything. So pretty much all CIRS patients lose production of VIP. It's like zero. It's unmeasurable. And so therefore you lose regulation, you become dysregulated, and that's exactly how you feel, is dysregulated. Everything's out of whack. So VIP has to be done at Quest. It's the only accurate place to do it. If it's under 50, they report it as less than 50, meaning they can't measure it. It's zero, essentially. It's unmeasurable. So pretty much every CIRS patient, that's where they're at. Now, of interest on your test tracking record, a couple other things that we'll look at on here. We're not going to go through every test, but just a couple of things. So the one that controls fluid balance is about, I don't know, 8 or 10 down there. It's called ADH. Quest, that's what it is from LabCorp. Quest measures it as copeptin, and it'll be written in there if that's what it is. So generally with CIRS patients, it's either zero or very low. And so that means that you'll pee out all of your water all the time, and you'll be always in a state of dehydration. Osmolality, which is right under that, is how concentrated your blood is. And so that gives us a reflection of how well you're doing with your water intake to keep up. Either you've been good or not good, but you can't trust your thirst, so you have to be drinking a lot of water every day. Minimum is half of your body weight in ounces, probably a lot more than that to keep up with these losses. Now, cytokines that are of importance to us are up at the top. So MMP9 is a very important cytokine. It's revving up your immune system to fight off foreign invaders. MMP9 tends to correlate with the amount of toxin you have in your system. So the higher it is, the more toxin you have, the longer it's going to take to detox you. But also it tends to correlate with a more current exposure. So if it's really low, it means you probably have a past exposure that you haven't healed from. If it's very high, you might be in a current exposure, which could be a real issue, and we have to deal with that. It has to be done through LabCorp and should never be over 270 or so. So anything over that is much too high. TGF-beta1 is the important cytokine. That's the one you had to go to a special lab to have it drawn. It has to be run through Quest, but Quest won't draw it. So you had to go to a special place to have it drawn. So TGF-1 is a very important cytokine, and it's responsible for activating your immune system to fight things off. And it goes up pretty quickly after an exposure. Even within 15 minutes, TGF-1 levels start to rise if you go into a bad building. But it also is involved with autoimmunity, and that's the big problem with TGF-1 is it controls something called the Th1, Th17 system, which is involved with your body's ability to determine whether you're going to attack yourself or not, autoimmune disease. So it's never a good thing to be attacking yourself, and there's a whole host of autoimmune diseases, right? So things like multiple sclerosis, MS, systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, psoriasis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of autoimmune diseases. And TGF-beta1, if it's high, causes you to start getting all that. And so it never should be over like 2,300. Levels over 5,000 are very dangerous and worrisome. And so we do things to try to bring that down as fast as we can. But it'll correct with the CIRS, but sometimes we have to do other steps to bring it down that we'll talk about. C4A is another important cytokine that we've looked at that you had to have drawn at a special lab. It's run through Quest. That's another important one. And C3A is the one we look at for chronic Lyme disease. So I'm concerned that you might be at risk for chronic Lyme disease depending upon your HLA genetics, if you're susceptible or not. And so the combination of C3A and the Lyme Western blot is a pretty good reflection of whether or not you might have Lyme disease or not. The biotoxin protocol will work for every biotoxin, including Borrelia and chronic Lyme disease, but We'd have to alter it slightly if you had Lyme disease, so it's important to kind of know that. But if the C3A levels, 100 or less, there's no chance that you have chronic Lyme disease. If it's 800 or 1,000, then we're more concerned. And again, the Lyme Western blot, coupled with that, is a pretty good reflection of whether you might have chronic Lyme disease or not. There are no good tests for chronic Lyme disease. Even the IGeneX test that everybody touts, that's only about 50% accurate. So this is a much better reflection of what's really going on. So the other one that's of importance is VEGF. So VEGF is vascular endothelial growth factor. That's very important with oxygen delivery because it helps to bring oxygen into your tissues when you're doing anything. So if you exercise or go up a flight of stairs or you're working out or whatever the thing is that you're doing, you need oxygen to your tissues, and VEGF kind of controls that. And so if it's low, then you can't get oxygen to your tissues, and you'll either have pain or you'll be exhausted or short of breath. I mean, something bad will happen because you won't be able to get oxygen there. And so VEGF is measured generally from Quest. Levels less than 31 are reported as less than 31 being 0. Levels 31 to 60 or so are okay. Anything over 60 is actually pretty good. Very few patients with CIRS have that. Most CIRS patients are less than 31 and basically meaning they don't have any. So those are kind of the major things that I wanted to go over right now. We might go over some other things on another video, but this will give you some good idea of what's going on with the biotoxin overview. And then in the next video, we'll talk about treatment. So this is Dr. Alan Grunning.